and welcome to Preemie Chats, a place for parents and healthcare professionals to gather, share stories, and learn from each other. My name is Jenna Morton. I'm one of 3 co-hosts who present this weekly series on behalf of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. I am a career broadcast journalist and mom to 3 NICU grads, including preemie twins who were born at 32 weeks and are now 12 years old. I live and work in Mi'kma'ki outside of Moncton, New Brunswick. Well, Preemie Chats is the creation of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. The foundation is a parent-led charity that helps families during and after their NICU time through education, support, and advocacy. You can see our website there on the screen, canadianpreemies.org. I hope that you will take some time to visit the website when we're finished today or in the future. You'll be able to find a replay of today's Preemie Chats, as well as links to all of our previous discussions. You'll find all kinds of resources and all kinds of things to help you, whether you are a parent, a grandparent, a preemie yourself, a healthcare professional. There's lots of resources on the site. Most importantly, it will help you connect with a community of parents and professionals who are working together to help our children thrive. I would love to know, of course, where you are joining us from today and why you are joining us, what brings you to us, whether you are a parent, preemie, a healthcare provider, you've just kind of stumbled across us, wherever you are joining from. We appreciate you being here. We would love to know where you're watching from, what brings you. And as we go through our discussion today, please feel free to share your comments, your questions, your experiences in the comments section. We will have an opportunity to try to answer some of your questions with our guest as we go through today. Well, speaking of today, today's topic is Indigenous milk medicine. And that's a term that's used in relation to breastfeeding within First Nations communities. And it honors the fact that it's about more than nourishment. It's a sacred practice rooted in ancestral knowledge, community care, and intergenerational strength. We're going to talk about how we celebrate this, how we support it, how we learn from this with a returning guest to Preemie Chats, Candy Edwards. Candy is well known for her work in advocacy at the regional, provincial, and national level. She's currently Director of Approaches to Community Wellbeing at Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority. She has decades of experience, and we are thrilled to have her joining us again on Preemie Chats. Hello, Candy.
Hello, good afternoon. I want to apologize in advance that I'm in an airport today, so I hope there's not too much commotion behind us.
We all know what life can be like, especially in the summer. We're going all kinds of different directions, so we are thrilled that you're able to take the time, even from the airport, to join us for this discussion.
All right, thank you for having me. So I'm going to try and share my slides, and we shall see how that goes.
I'm just going to stay online while Candy tries to get her presentation up here, and again say welcome to everyone who's watching. I see a few people adding their thoughts in the comments already. Hi, Sandy. Thank you for joining us. And it looks like Candy's presentation is there. We're going to pull it up. And look at that. There we go. Wonderful. I'm going to turn it over to you, Candy, and look forward to learning.
All right. Thank you so much, Jenna. So welcome, everybody. As Jenna said, my name is Candy Edwards, Wabishke Miigwinekwe Nijishnakas. I'm a member of the Inimbuguzagagan Anishinabek in the Robinson Superior Treaty, where I'm actually calling in from today. But I usually live and work on the traditional territory of the Lac Seul First Nation, signatory to Treaty 3 in Sioux Lookout, Ontario. So we're going to talk about Indigenous milk medicine today, and we're going to talk a little bit about Indigenous Milk Medicine Week. So what is Indigenous Milk Medicine Week? So it was previously known as Native Breastfeeding Week. It is celebrated the second week of August. So there is World Breastfeeding Week is typically celebrated the first week in August, although in Canada we celebrate National Breastfeeding Week the first week of October. as that is typically when a breastfeeding relationship would begin if someone were to become pregnant on New Year's Day. So the theme for Indigenous Milk Medicine Week this year is strengthening our traditions from birth and beyond. And the whole week serves to celebrate and seeks to honor the diversity of Indigenous breastfeeding experiences, to increase support and resources, promote healing and wellness, and provide stories and traditional knowledge regarding breastfeeding. It's also an attempt to provide opportunities for people to share their Indigenous milk medicine journey stories with each other. On this note, I will say that when I was speaking with a friend who was on the team for this week's Indigenous Milk Medicine planning, they did a call out for Indigenous lactation consultants, and there are fewer than 25 around the world. So I'm very proud to be one of them. So why is Indigenous Milk Medicine Week important? While breastfeeding rates in Canada have increased over the last decade, racial and ethnic health disparities continue. We need more research on Indigenous breastfeeding trends. This is really important because, as you can see from that graph, this data is from the 2022 Canadian Community Health Survey, and we didn't have enough information to be able to report on First Nations, Métis, and Inuit breastfeeding rates. So previous reports, though, have revealed that only 77.8% of Indigenous women in Canada initiated breastfeeding with their last child, while 88% of non-Indigenous women initiated breastfeeding. Only 16.6% of off-reserve Indigenous women exclusively breast their last child for 6 months or more, compared to 26.7% of non-Indigenous women. Some of the reasons for health disparities like this are because of a lack of Indigenous breastfeeding supports and lactation consultants, which I just spoke to, and colonization in communities that really disrupted family bonds. So things like the 60s scoop, residential schools, and a trend that continues to this day is the overrepresentation of First Nations children in child welfare care. We also know that breastfeeding is a really important social driver of health, which are conditions that you're born into and you grow, work, live, and age in that affect your health throughout your whole life. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it matters in a holistic way. So we know a lot of the physical benefits of breastfeeding, immunity and healing, it's custom medicine, growth and development, natural pain relief, wound care, and toxin protection. But we'll dive into that a little more deeply, just in case people are less aware. So immunity and healing, we know that breast milk contains antibodies, white blood cells, and antimicrobial properties that protect against illness and infection. This is really, really particularly important for those NICU babies. It's custom medicine. It adapts to baby's needs so that if the baby is sick, the milk composition changes to help fight the illness. This has been really physically demonstrated by some women in which they can show pumped milk from before a child got sick and what pumped milk looks like while a child is sick. And it physically looks very, very different. It is really important for growth and development. Sorry, to go back to the custom medicine piece, one of the really interesting facts about breastfeeding is that it's not one way. It's not just the baby taking from the mother, but the baby is also passing on information to the mother through the act of breastfeeding so that the milk becomes tailored to what that baby's needs are.
Candy,
sorry.
My apologies, Candy. I'm just going to pop in for a second. Your slides don't seem to be advancing on our screen.
I wonder how I make that happen because they are advancing on my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me stop sharing and see how I get back to you. Okay, stop sharing. Thank you for letting me know that because I would never have known. Okay, we're going to go without the slides, which we were potentially prepared to do. So I'm going to talk to you. So.
Well, and I will stay on the screen so that you don't feel like you're just talking to yourself.
I apologize. Some technical difficulties today, and the presentation is apparently too large for sharing in alternate methods for some reason. What you're really missing out on is some beautiful graphics that are from an Indigenous artist from one of the communities that's served by the organization I work for. And but if there's a way to share the slides afterward or to have them potentially hosted on the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation website, we'll see what we can do. Yes. So we know that breastfeeding really promotes optimal growth and development, brain development, organ function. It provides natural pain relief. So it contains analgesic components that help reduce pain and promote comfort. If you have given babies immunizations before, you will know this. Babies that are breastfed during vaccines tend to have very minimal pain response compared to infants that are not being breastfed at the time. It promotes wound care. So it was very traditionally used in First Nations communities and many other cultures around the world topically to help promote healing of cuts, infections, eye conditions. It has been demonstrated to get rid of warts. It's really quite fascinating, actually, because it's living, it's alive. And so it can do a lot more healing than I think we give it credit for. And then it also acts to protect an infant from toxins. So it acts as a filter between environmental toxins, a bit of a protective barrier to keep that baby safe from things that might be floating around. So when we talk about why Indigenous milk medicine as not a product, but as something that we can provide to infants and why that matters emotionally, we know it promotes bonding and attachment. It helps infants regulate emotions. It offers emotional protection, and it affirms identity. So in regards to bonding and attachment, I think many of us have hopefully experienced that, but there are hormonal things that happen while you're breastfeeding a baby that release those love hormones that causes us. It supports falling in love with our babies. And often when we fall in love with our babies, we make other loving decisions to promote their health and well-being. So it also fosters trust. It helps regulate babies' nervous systems and emotional states, that closeness, that security, those feeding rhythms. It offers the emotional protection. It is really seen in many First Nations communities as a shield against trauma, something that can protect in so many different ways and offers nurturing in times of stress. And in terms of affirmation of identity, this is particularly important for First Nations people who there was an attempt to strip Indigenous identity away from people, and assimilation was a big push. And so if there are ways that we can promote that security and identity, breastfeeding being one of them, then those are things that we really want to support. It helps reinforce the child's place in both the family and the community through that act of loving care. So if we talk about mental development and cognitive development, learning and memory, so we know that breastfeeding also supports brain development. It provides some of those essential fatty acids that are really, really important, DHA, ARA. We know that breastfed babies typically have IQ points that are several points higher than non-breastfed babies. We don't know a lot about this in terms of is it the breast milk or is it the act of breastfeeding? Because potentially if we are choosing to breastfeed and showing that kind of commitment and dedication and spending that much time with our babies, we may also be making other choices that promote brain development. Maybe we're reading to them more often, singing to them, talking to them, playing games with them, that kind of thing. So where there's not, it's correlation and not causation at this point in time, and more research is needed. But we know that it can be helpful to breastfeed our babies.
I think that's such an important a point to make for people who might just start to feel guilty because for some reason they can't breastfeed, to know that it's that closeness and the time, and most people can put that in even if they're having an issue with milk itself.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. A lot of these things are things that we can find other ways. Adoptive parents, of course, can help promote healthy brain development and things like this. But We do know that there are some things that can't be replicated yet by science and can't always be understood by science. And so, again, the more healthy choices that we're making for our children, the more love and care that they receive, the more benefits that they receive. So is there kind of dose dependent in terms of, how much can we? I don't think we can love babies too much. That's the final answer. So, and it's all good for us. It also promotes, enhances attention, learning, and memory through that both the physical closeness and the nutrient content. It's perfectly designed for babies and their needs. That foundation of security and trust helps promote mental health throughout a lifetime through that secure early attachment. Again, non-breastfeeding parents can also create that environment. And there is a belief in First Nations communities that you've probably heard the term blood memory before. Milk memory is very similar in that it can be seen as a way to pass down ancestral knowledge and wisdom and memory and tradition. So that there's a milk memory being passed on too, which I think is very beautiful.
That's a beautiful phrase, the idea of that, milk memory.
And so the fourth quadrant of a medicine wheel is the spiritual component. And so why does breast milk and breastfeeding matter spiritually? It's considered a sacred medicine, a gift from the Creator. We're actually going to watch a short video called The Creator's Gift to Mothers. But breast milk carries a sacred life force and offers spiritual protection. Sometimes breastfeeding can have a ceremonial role in communities, and it may be included as part of naming ceremonies or in prayers as a symbol of life and connection and spiritual nourishment. It symbolizes the circle of life, so that continuity of life and connection to past and future generations. And we know that most of the time in past cultures, there weren't necessarily lactation consultants that were trained and so on. And so it was the grandmothers and the aunties that passed that knowledge on to new parents. It provides a connection to Mother Earth. So it's a life-sustaining force, and it reflects the nourishment provided by the land. It's considered the first traditional food in First Nations culture. But I think one of the other things that is a really important benefit right now in this time of sort of climate change and upheaval around the world is the actual impact breastfeeding does not have on the environment in terms of, creating waste and things like that. The amount of water that's required to produce formula and then to reconstitute formula. And when we're speaking about First Nations families, many of them live in communities that do not have access to safe, clean drinking water from their taps. There is so many layers to that in terms of now they're purchasing formula and purchasing water to offer their babies formula, to sanitize items used to feed their babies and so on. And this is not related to spiritual, why breastfeeding matters necessarily, but some of the things that we do often without thinking offer passive protections to our children. So when we're giving them things made with tap water that contains fluoride, they're getting that passive protection against dental caries, which when people are using bottled water to feed their babies and their children, they're not getting, and therefore there are significantly higher rates of tooth decay in First Nations families that don't have access to safe, clean drinking water. So that's an aside, but I just think it's interesting to point out. So the connection to Mother Earth, though, I think is really, really important in terms of like what can we do? This is one thing that we can do. If we can increase breastfeeding, it reduces the impact on resources that are scarce or unavailable in a lot of communities. One final kind of spiritual benefit of breastfeeding relates to dreaming and guidance. In some cultures, in First Nations or Indigenous cultures, breastfeeding is a time when they're very open to messages, and they may receive messages from ancestors or through dreams while they're breastfeeding their infants. Stories and teachings to pass on to their babies.
That's a beautiful thought to anyone who has breastfed or spent that time with an infant with them. There is this kind of magic to those moments that are often in very quiet times and quiet places that it opens you up to a lot.
I think it's really well depicted in, if you've seen any of those tree of life photos, where the milk ducts are sort of highlighted and the infant feeding at the breast, and you can see that tree of life and that connection. And it is really a spiritual feeling when you consider it from that aspect. So some of the other reasons that it matters that we are really focusing on promoting breastfeeding in First Nations communities and Indigenous communities through Indigenous Milk Medicine Week is overall medicine teaching. So we talked about those different 4 quadrants. None of them are more important than the other, and breastfeeding supports balance in all of them. It also is often seen in First Nations communities as a way to heal from intergenerational trauma. So it was an act that was really forcibly removed from some families. And it's something that we can support now as a way to reclaim those cultural practices, heal from that colonial disruption to family life and to parenting traditions. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about in this kind of realm is around just the level of respect for those that give life. And so that's typically women or two-spirited people. And breastfeeding is part of the sacred role of those life givers and protectors of knowledge and passing on tradition to infants. So we're going to watch a video, which is just under 7 minutes. But just before we do, just sort of to tie all of that together, I think the focus on Indigenous milk medicine as a medicine, but also as something worthy of celebrating, is just keeping in mind that it's not just a biological act. It's a ceremony. It's a very powerful expression of love, of resilience, of connection to ancestors. And, as a parent who's breastfed, I think you can see that. It's like people have been doing this since the dawn of time. And there is this connection to history and the past through that. It's also connection to the child, obviously, and to the land. It's really medicine in its purest form. It's something that's living, it's relational, and it's whole. So it's a complete medicine that we're able to offer our children. We've often talked about being the first immunization as well. So it really supports health holistically. So we'll go to the video.
All right, so everyone's going to bear with us for a moment here to make sure that I figure this out correctly. So
in the Anishinaabe culture, breastfeeding has been the natural way to feed our babies since time began. Breast milk is the original traditional food. Our cookbooks tell us that breast milk is a mother's gift from the Creator to feed our babies. In the old days, every woman breastfed her children, often for many years. We didn't worry about our babies getting harmful things through our breast milk because we lived a healthy life. It is more complicated these days. Alcohol and drugs have had a serious impact on many of our communities. One of the results is that fewer women are feeding their babies the natural way. And yet, breast milk is the perfect food for babies. It promotes good health and protects children from many diseases. It even helps babies' brains develop. Breast milk changes as a baby grows to give him exactly what he needs when he needs it. Breast milk is the only food babies need for their first 6 months, and yet the benefits last all their lives. But breastfeeding is more than just food. Breastfeeding is a way to bond with your baby, to show her you love her, to comfort her when she's upset. It helps her feel safe and loved. So with all these good things, why are so many Native women choosing not to breastfeed these days? Well, some women feel that breastfeeding will tie them down when they would rather go out. They think it's easier to bottle feed. In fact, when breastfeeding is well established, it is easier than bottle feeding. Breast milk is always ready and always the right temperature. You don't have to mix it up. You don't have to sterilize bottles. You don't have to worry about clean water in the community either. And babies are easier to take with you when you don't need lots of equipment. Besides, breastfeeding is free. Why waste your money on formula when you already have something that's better for your baby? One myth about breastfeeding is that you need a really healthy diet yourself, and that could cost a lot on reserve. In the past, our mothers were fed fish broth and other food from the land. It was wholesome and nutritious. It's true that what you eat goes to your baby through your milk, but you don't have to have a perfect diet to breastfeed. You will make great breast milk on your regular diet. Just try to eat 3 meals a day and drink plenty of fluids. Another myth is that if you're a smoker, you shouldn't breastfeed. Secondhand tobacco smoke increases a baby's risk of pneumonia, asthma, and ear infections. But breastfeeding is a defense against those things. It's better for you and your baby if you don't smoke, but if you do, breastfeeding gives your baby more protection. Try to smoke after breastfeeding, not before, and always smoke outside. Some people also think that mothers shouldn't breastfeed if they're dealing with a drug addiction and are on Suboxone or methadone treatment. The truth is, breastfeeding is still better for a baby if his mom is on a stable dose of Suboxone. Some babies are born in withdrawal if their mom was on drugs when she was pregnant. But when a breastfeeding mom is on steady Suboxone or methadone treatment, it helps her baby have less severe withdrawal. As for alcohol, when a breastfeeding mom has one beer or cooler or a glass of wine once in a while, that does not harm her baby. But in general, it's best to limit or not drink when breastfeeding. If you have a question or need breastfeeding help, talk to someone you trust. Your community nurse or doctor can give you information and support. You can also ask another mom or auntie or kokum for help. So in conclusion, it's almost always better for a baby to breastfeed. But what about mom? You guessed it. Breastfeeding is good for her too. Breastfeeding helps a mother relax and feel good. It helps her body recover after growing a baby for 9 months. And it helps her lose weight by burning extra calories. In fact, breastfeeding helps moms for years afterwards. It helps prevent some types of cancer and heart disease. It helps keep mother's bones strong. It also helps protect against type 2 diabetes. That's important for First Nations women. Dads are a very important part of the breastfeeding journey too. Breastfeeding moms need a circle of support to help them physically, emotionally, and spiritually. A supportive dad can make the difference between whether a mom sticks with breastfeeding or gives up. Certainly, there are some challenges when you breastfeed. It isn't always easy, it isn't always fun, yet it's so good for your baby and good for you too. Of course, you can be a great mother no matter how you feed your baby. But if you choose to breastfeed, a few months or even a few weeks is an awesome accomplishment and a great start for your baby. And the longer, the better. Like our mothers and grandmothers before us, we can use the Creator's gift to make healthy babies and families.
Oh, thank you, Jenna,
There.
for sharing that
There was
for me.
another video trying to play there and be. That was an absolutely beautiful video.
Yes, I had the privilege of working on that video some time ago now. I think it's almost 10 years old. I would actually really love to find a little bit of funding to update it slightly, just some of the terminology we wouldn't use anymore. We would, I think, have a better understanding of being more gender inclusive in the language that we use. But it has a lot of great messages in there. And I love, as we discussed a little bit earlier, that you can do these things even if you aren't breastfeeding your baby. If you choose not to, if you're unable to, if you're an adoptive parent, if you're the non-birthing parent, there are still ways to promote that healthy development and that bonding.
I think it's so important, and I love the phrase that you used earlier in our discussion. You talked about it being custom medicine, and what a beautiful way to describe how personalized and important breast milk is. And like you say, like you show in the video, whether it's a little bit or it's for weeks, months that you can do this, every little bit makes a difference.
Absolutely.
We're kind of coming up on our time here. If anyone has any questions, I'd encourage them to ask them in the comments before we wrap things up here. I'm wondering, Candy, if you could talk just a little bit about, some of the positives you've seen over the past little bit in terms of how the healthcare system in general is learning from Indigenous milk medicine and putting that into practice.
I think that's actually a really great question, Jenna. So I have been involved in work with the Breastfeeding Committee for Canada now for about 6 years. I think I joined in 2019. And I joined to support a project that was looking to promote becoming baby friendly for hospitals across Canada. So there were 26 hospitals, I think, that were involved in that first project through a CIHR grant. And so our job, if you're not familiar with the Baby Friendly Initiative, there are 10 steps to be baby friendly, to achieve that designation for your healthcare center, your hospital, your organization. And they all promote health and well-being for all babies, but they're all supportive of breastfeeding. So it was a really great project. I loved being part of it. It was highly successful. But at every meeting, at every table I sat at, I said, okay, but we're missing First Nations families. Like, they have the lowest breastfeeding rates of any culture in Canada. And none of we're promoting these tools and we're supporting these hospitals who then are in turn supporting First Nations families. But it looks like the things that are working for non-Indigenous families aren't working the same way for First Nations families. We have to address this. How do we do this? And it led to some different smaller projects within the work that we were doing. And, we looked at hospitals that maybe supported more First Nations families and things like that. We looked for opportunities to get feedback from Indigenous people across Canada, not just First Nations, but Métis and Inuit as well. And it has led to the successful granting of a second CIHR grant, really specific now to developing tools and resources to support hospitals and facilities that in turn support First Nations, Métis, and Inuit families. So I think there is a recognition that there is no sort of pan-Indigenous approach, and that people, healthcare providers, facilities really need to engage with the Indigenous groups in their catchment area that they are serving to find out, how are we missing the mark? Or alternatively, another project our organization is working on right now is a maternal newborn health status report. And the hospital in Sulico, because the number of First Nations families it serves is so high, they have been leaders in some of the practices that are really supportive of breastfeeding. And in turn, then some of the First Nations families are maybe more likely to breastfeed than those that are birthing at other facilities. So they were the first hospital in the province to have a skin-to-skin policy, and then a skin-to-skin policy in the OR. So we know that's good for all babies. That's a huge win, but it also supports breastfeeding success. So how do we get to a place of cultural safety for all families? And so we're discussing, we don't want to just hear from families like what was unsupportive, but if there are things that helped you along your journey that made you feel comfortable, like we need to hear about those too, so that we can help promote them in other facilities, because not everybody is going to deliver in Menoyawin and Sulikot. So there are discussions happening. For the first time ever, the Breastfeeding Committee for Canada has an equity, diversity, and inclusion standing group as part of the organization, and there are things that we can do to do better, but the best way to find out is to engage those local communities. What is it that you need? What did you get that worked, and what didn't you get that would have helped?
And I think it's so powerful when we take the time to ask those questions and really gather that data to see what, you never know what some other center might be doing that could be helpful, and how different things can move across cultures as well. I think as we start to learn about not just how someone does it, but the why that they're doing this. And, again, the messages that were in that video and that you shared in your presentation of the tradition and the history that comes with this, that's part of every culture, although not every culture talks about it in the same way. And it's so wonderful for us to have these examples to be able to spark these kind of conversations. Well, I don't see any other questions coming for us in the comments. We've had some wonderful hellos from people who are watching, and I'll share that Sandy said the animation was fantastic. It really helped her understand what breastfeeding benefits were for both mom and baby, and I think it's so important to have those reminders for people of sometimes it's those the little practical things like the cost, and thinking of it as something that is easy rather than always being hard, even while acknowledging that, you might get a, little bite in there now and then that, 14 years later, you might still remember what that felt like.
Indeed. Yeah. The overall message, honestly, is it can be challenging, of course, but there are supports available, and encouraging people to find supports that are working for them. So the more lactation consultants or trained breastfeeding counselors that we have that are representing the community that they're supporting, the better. To have that cultural understanding, I think, is good. So if we can encourage Indigenous folks to consider pursuing, lactation training, that's a huge win.
That's a great point, and just a thank you there from Erin for sharing your work, and a thank you to Erin for pointing out that we were having an issue with the slides there earlier today as well. So I'm going to say goodbye to you now, Candy, and thank you again for taking the time to share this with us, especially while you're getting ready to go on your own journey there at the airport.
Yes, thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you, Candy. And thank you to everyone who's been watching and sharing in the comments. My guest today was Candy Edwards, who's the Director of Approaches to Community Wellbeing at Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority. You will be able to watch a replay of this video on our website, the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation website, canadianpreemies.org. You can see it there on your screen. It'll be available on our social media. It's on YouTube. And we will see if we can find a way to get her slides incorporated in there somehow as well. I want to take a moment just to thank all of you who've been joining us and engaging, sharing your experiences, as well as thanking our sponsors who help keep this going. CPBF is a charitable organization, and it's thanks to our sponsors that we are able to put on programs like Preemie Chats. If you are able to donate as well, you can find a donate button on the website. And of course, not everyone is in a position to financially donate, and that is okay. But if you can take a moment to share and spread the word about what we're doing, that has an even bigger impact. So please take a moment, if you found this helpful, to share it with someone else and to let them know that Preemie Chats is here every Friday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern. I hope that you will be able to join again next week. And until then, take care.